The morning sun rose over the small village of Millbrook, and 12-year-old Marcus woke up to the sound of birds singing outside his window. He rubbed his eyes and stretched his arms, feeling excited because today was a very special day. His grandmother had promised to tell him a secret that she had kept hidden for many years, and Marcus could not wait to hear what it was. He jumped out of bed and ran downstairs where his grandmother sat in her old wooden chair by the fireplace. She was a kind woman with silver hair and warm brown eyes that always seemed to sparkle when she smiled. "Good morning, Grandma," Marcus said as he gave her a big hug. "Good morning, my dear boy," she replied with a gentle smile on her face. "Are you ready to hear the story I promised to tell you?" Marcus nodded his head quickly and sat down on the floor next to her chair. He had been waiting for this moment for a whole week, and his heart was beating fast with excitement. His grandmother took a deep breath and began to speak in a soft voice. "Many years ago, when I was just a young girl like you are a young boy now, I discovered something amazing in the forest behind our village. It was a hidden valley that nobody else knew about, and it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen." Marcus listened with wide eyes as his grandmother continued her story. She told him about tall trees with golden leaves, a crystal-clear river that sang as it flowed over smooth stones, and flowers of every color that grew along the banks. "But that was not the most special thing about the valley," his grandmother said with a mysterious look in her eyes. "The valley was home to creatures that most people believe only exist in fairy tales and old legends." "What kind of creatures?" Marcus asked, leaning forward with curiosity burning inside him. His grandmother smiled and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small silver key that glowed faintly in the morning light. "This key will show you the way to the hidden valley, Marcus. I am giving it to you because I am too old to make the journey now, and someone must protect the secret." Marcus took the key in his trembling hands and felt a strange warmth spread through his fingers. The key seemed to hum with energy, and for a moment he thought he saw tiny sparks of light dancing around it. "You must be very careful," his grandmother warned him. "Not everyone should know about the hidden valley. There are people who would want to harm the creatures that live there, and you must never let that happen." Marcus promised his grandmother that he would keep the secret safe and protect the valley with all his heart. She smiled and told him that she knew he would make her proud. After eating a quick breakfast of bread and honey, Marcus put on his boots and grabbed his jacket. He placed the silver key in his pocket and headed toward the door, ready to begin his adventure. "Remember," his grandmother called after him, "follow the key. It will guide you when you feel lost." Marcus waved goodbye and stepped outside into the bright morning sunshine. The air smelled fresh and clean, and he could hear the distant sound of the river that ran through the village. He walked past the old church and the bakery, where Mrs. Thompson was already making her famous apple pies. The forest stood at the edge of the village, tall and dark and full of mystery. Marcus had played in the outer parts of the forest many times before, but he had never gone deep inside, where the ancient trees grew thick and close together. As he entered the forest, the light grew dimmer, and the sounds of the village faded away. He could hear birds calling to each other high up in the branches, and small animals rustled through the leaves on the ground. Marcus walked for what felt like hours, climbing over fallen logs and pushing through bushes covered with berries. Several times he thought he was lost, but then he remembered what his grandmother had said about the key. He pulled the silver key from his pocket and held it up in front of him. At first, nothing happened, but then the key began to glow, brighter and brighter. It seemed to pull gently in one direction, like a compass pointing towards something hidden in the depths of the forest. Marcus followed where the key led him, and soon he came to a part of the forest that looked different from anywhere he had been before. The trees here were much older, with trunks so wide that 10 people holding hands could not wrap their arms around them. Strange mushrooms grew at their bases, glowing softly with pale blue and green light. He heard the sound of water up ahead and quickened his pace. The key was glowing so brightly now that it was almost difficult to look at, and Marcus knew he must be getting close to the hidden valley. Suddenly the trees parted, and Marcus found himself standing at the edge of a cliff. Below him stretched the most beautiful sight he had ever seen in all his young life. The hidden valley spread out before him like a painting come to life. Green meadows dotted with colorful flowers rolled down to a shimmering river that wound its way through the center of the valley. Waterfalls tumbled down from rocky cliffs on the far side, creating rainbows in the misty air. But what made Marcus gasp out loud were the creatures he saw moving through the valley below. There were deer with antlers that sparkled like diamonds, birds with feathers of pure gold, and in the distance he could see something large and magnificent drinking from the river. Was that a unicorn? Marcus could not believe his eyes. Everything his grandmother had told him was true, and now he was about to enter a world that most people only dreamed about. He looked down at the silver key in his hand and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." Now he just needed to find a way down into the valley, and his real adventure would begin. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Kirith bounded into the kitchen with his usual energy, his small wings fluttering with excitement as he looked for his favorite human and the treats she always had waiting for him. But today, something was different. Mira moved slowly, carefully, like someone who was trying very hard not to let her body betray her pain, and when she turned to greet him, her smile did not quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Kirith," she said, and her voice was the same as always, warm and kind, but there was something underneath it that the young dragon could not name. "Good morning, Mira," he replied, climbing onto his usual stool near the preparation table. "What did you make today?" "Honey cakes with spiced cream," she answered, and she reached up to a high shelf to retrieve a special jar of crystallized sugar that she used only for his treats. When her arm stretched upward, her sleeve fell back, and Kirith saw something that made his blood turn cold. Dark bruises wrapped around her forearm, purple and black, and shaped exactly like fingers, the fingers of someone much larger than a human, and they were fresh enough that the edges still looked swollen. "Mira," he said, and his voice came out very small, "what happened to your arm?" She froze for just a moment, and then she pulled her sleeve down quickly and turned to face him with that same, not quite right smile. "Oh, that," she said lightly. "I slipped yesterday while carrying a heavy pot, and I caught myself badly on the edge of the counter. It looks worse than it feels, I promise." Kirith was young, but he was not stupid, and he had been raised in a warrior culture, where every hatchling learned to identify injuries from their very first lessons. Those marks were not from a fall, or a counter, or a heavy pot. Those marks were from a grip, from someone grabbing her arm and squeezing hard enough to bruise the flesh, down to the bone, and he knew that no human could have made those marks, because no human had hands that large. "Mira," he said again, and this time his voice was serious in a way that surprised even him. "Please, do not lie to me." Her face crumpled for just a moment, showing a flash of fear and exhaustion and something that looked like despair, but then she rebuilt her mask and shook her head. "It is nothing, Kirith," she said firmly. "Please, let us not speak of it. Here, have a honey cake. I added extra cinnamon the way you like." He took the cake because refusing it would have hurt her feelings, but he could not taste the sweetness because his mind was racing with questions and his heart was heavy with worry. That night, Kirith could not sleep, and he found himself wandering the halls of the estate in the quiet hours when most of the household was resting, and his small paws carried him toward the kitchens without any conscious decision on his. As he approached, he heard voices, and he pressed himself against the cold stone wall and listened. "You were late with the morning meal by 6 minutes," a deep voice rumbled, and Kareth recognized it as Overseer Tharn, the Dracarath who managed all the servants in the household. 6 minutes, human. Do you think the High Lord's household runs on your convenience? I apologize, Overseer. Mira's voice came, small and steady. The bread required additional time to rise properly because of the cold. It will not happen again. You are correct, Tharn growled. It will not happen again. Kareth heard a sound then, a sharp crack of scales against flesh, and a muffled cry that was cut off almost before it began. And his small body began to tremble with a rage he had never felt before in his short life. Remember your place, human, Tharn said, and his voice was thick with satisfaction. You exist to serve, and you should be grateful that you are allowed to exist at all. Footsteps echoed away from the kitchen, heavy Dracarath footsteps, and then there was only silence, and the sound of someone breathing in short, pained gasps. Kareth waited until he was sure Tharn was gone, and then he crept into the kitchen, and found Mira sitting on the floor with her back against the cold stone wall, holding her face in her hands. Mira, he whispered. Her head snapped up, and her eyes went wide with horror when she saw him standing there. Kareth, no, you should not be here. You should not have seen that. Please, please forget what you saw. I cannot forget, he said, and he moved closer to her, his amber eyes bright with tears he did not understand. He hurt you. I heard it. How long has this been happening? Mira stared at him for a long moment, and then the fight seemed to drain out of her, leaving her looking smaller and older than she had ever looked before. Since I arrived, she said. Quietly. 3 years. Tharn believes that human servants need regular discipline to keep us obedient, and he enjoys delivering that discipline himself. But that is wrong, Kareth said, and his voice cracked with confusion and anger. In Dracarath culture, those who hold power are supposed to protect those beneath them, not harm them for pleasure. We are human, Mira said, and her smile was the saddest thing Kareth had ever seen. We are not beneath you, Kareth. We are outside you. We do not count. We are not protected by your codes or your honor. We are tools that happen to breathe and bleed. But you are my friend, Kareth said. Mira's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out and touched his snout with fingers that were gentle despite their trembling. And you are mine, she said, which is why you must forget this. If you try to help me, you will only make things worse. Tharn will hurt me more to punish me for speaking to you. Listen to a hatchling over an overseer. Please. Kareth, let this go. He wanted to argue, wanted to roar and breathe fire and make everyone pay for hurting his friend. But he was small, and his fire was barely more than warm breath. And he knew that she was right about one thing at least. No one would listen to a hatchling. So he nodded and pretended to agree, and he let Mira think that he would let this go and forget what he had seen. But Kareth was his father's son, and Varanthos had never let an injustice go unanswered in his entire life. The difference was that Varanthos fought with armies and fire and the fear of 1,000 worlds. Kareth would have to find another weapon. Over the next 2 days, he asked his tutors strange questions about history and law and the old traditions of the Dracarath, and his tutors were pleased by his sudden interest in his heritage, never suspecting that the small golden hatchling was searching for a way to save a human cook from a monster who wore Dracarath scales. When he finally found what he was looking for, buried deep in the ancient laws of their people, Kareth smiled for the first time in days. It was a sharp smile, full of small teeth, and it did not look like a child's smile at all. The War Council of High Lord Varanthos was held in the Chamber of Flames, a massive room carved from volcanic glass where torches burned with fire that had not gone out in 3,000 years, and it was the most important room in the most important estate in 3 star systems. 7 generals sat around the obsidian table, each one a legend of war in their own right. and 4 planetary governors had joined them via holographic projection, their images flickering slightly as they discussed the movement of fleets and the distribution of resources. At the head of the table sat High Lord Varanthos himself, and he was everything that his enemies feared. His scales were the deep red of dried blood, and his eyes burned with an intelligence that had outmaneuvered 100 rivals. And when he spoke, even the bravest warriors leaned in to listen, because his voice carried the weight of conquest and command. The outer colonies will require additional garrison forces. One of the generals was saying, the human populations there have been showing signs of unrest, and we cannot afford another rebellion while the treaty negotiations with the Kethvari are so delicate. Increase the garrison by 30%, Varanthos replied, and remind the colonial governors that unrest is a failure of management, not a failure of the humans. If they cannot keep order with the tools they have, I will find governors who can. The holographic images of the planetary governors shifted uncomfortably, and the general who had spoken nodded quickly in agreement. It was at that moment that the great doors of the Chamber of Flames swung open with a crash, and every head turned to see who would dare interrupt the High Lord's War Council. Kirith walked into the room with his head held high and his small wings spread wide, and his golden scales caught the firelight and made him glow like a tiny sun. Varanthos rose from his seat, rolled across the chamber like thunder. Kirith, what is the meaning of this intrusion? You know that this chamber is forbidden to you during council sessions. Return to your quarters immediately. The generals were watching with expressions that ranged from amusement to annoyance, and one of them chuckled softly at the sight of the little hatchling standing before the might of the Dracorath War Council. Kirith took a deep breath, and he thought of Mira, and he thought of the bruises on her arm, and the tears in her eyes, and the way she had said, "We do not count," like it was simply the way the universe worked. And then he spoke the words he had found in the ancient texts, the words that had not been spoken by a hatchling in over 600 years. "I invoke the law of witness," he said, and his voice did not tremble, even though his legs wanted to collapse beneath him. "I have seen dishonor in this house, and I demand it be heard." Followed was so complete that Kirith could hear the crackle of the eternal flames and the pounding of his own heart. One of the generals dropped his data tablet, and it clattered against the obsidian table with a sound that seemed impossibly loud. "What did you say?" Varanthos asked, and his voice was very quiet, which was somehow more frightening than if he had roared. "The law of witness," Kirith repeated. "It states that any member of a noble house, regardless of age or rank, may bring a formal accusation of dishonor before the head of household, and the head of household must hear the accusation and render judgment. It is written in the 3rd Book of Laws, chapter 17, verses 3 through 9. The generals exchanged looks of pure disbelief, and one of them actually laughed out loud before catching himself and covering his mouth with a clawed hand. Varanthos stared at his son for a long moment, and something flickered in his burning eyes that might have been anger, or might have been something else entirely. "You invoke ancient law," Varanthos said slowly, "in front of my generals and governors, interrupting a war council for an accusation of dishonor. Do you understand what you are doing, hatchling?" "Yes, father," Kirith said. "I understand perfectly." Varanthos could have dismissed him, could have declared the law outdated and irrelevant, could have sent his son away in disgrace and dealt with him later in private. But the holographic governors were watching, and the generals were watching, and every one of them knew the ancient laws as well as Kirith did. To refuse a proper invocation of the law of witness would make Varanthos look weak, would make him look like a lord who feared what his own hatchling might say. "Very well," Varanthos said, and he lowered himself back into his seat with dangerous grace. "Speak your accusation, and it had better be worthy of this spectacle." Stepped forward until he stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the most powerful Dracorath in 3 star systems, and he did not let himself look small. "I accuse Overseer Tharn of dishonor," he announced. "He has been brutalizing the human servants of this household, beating them for minor infractions, and sometimes for no reason at all. I have witnessed the injuries he has inflicted. I have seen the bruises and the fear, and I have heard him strike a servant with my own ears." The general stirred uncomfortably, and one of them spoke up with a dismissive wave of his clawed hand. "This is your great accusation, hatchling, that an overseer disciplines servants? This is not dishonor. This is household management." "I did not give you permission to speak," Varanthos said quietly, and the general immediately fell silent. "Bring Overseer Tharn to this chamber," Varanthos commanded, and a servant rushed to obey. Confused and slightly annoyed at being summoned to the War Council, and when he saw Kirith standing in the center of the chamber, his confusion deepened. "My lord," Tharn said, bowing deeply, "how may I serve?" "This hatchling has accused you of dishonor," Varanthos said. "He claims you have been brutalizing the human servants beyond the bounds of proper discipline. What say you to this accusation?" Tharn looked at Kirith with an expression that shifted from confusion to contempt, and then he laughed, a deep rumbling laugh that echoed off the volcanic glass walls. "My lord, they are only humans," he said, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. "Discipline is necessary to keep them obedient and efficient. I have merely been doing my duty. The hatchling is young and soft. Perhaps he has been spending too much time in the kitchens, and has developed an unfortunate attachment to the cook there." Several of the generals nodded in agreement. Kirith felt his hope begin to waver. But then he remembered the words that Mira had spoken, and he remembered how she had said, "We do not count," and something inside him hardened into diamond. "Then by the law of witness," Kirith said, raising his voice so that it rang through the chamber, "I exercise my right of claim. I claim the human cook known as Mira Chen as my personal servant, my property, my responsibility, and if she is mine, then Overseer Tharn has harmed what belongs to me." The chamber went completely still. Even Varanthos looked surprised, his burning eyes widening slightly as he stared at his youngest son. "A hatchling cannot claim a servant," Tharn sputtered. "This is absurd, my lord. Surely you will not allow this mockery of our traditions." "The law does not specify an age requirement for claiming servants," Kirith said calmly. "I have studied the texts extensively. Any member of a noble house may claim any servant who is not already claimed by another, and Mira Chen was designated as general household staff, not claimed by anyone." "He is correct," one of the generals said reluctantly. "The law is the law." Varanthos was still staring at his son, and his expression was unreadable. "If the cook is yours," Varanthos said slowly, "then Tharn has indeed harmed your property without your permission, which is an offense against your honor as a member of this house." "My lord, please," Tharn said, and for the first time there was fear in his voice. "I did not know the hatchling had any interest in a human. I was only doing my duty. I meant no offense to your house." Kirith looked at Tharn, and he thought of all the nights Mira had spent in pain, all the bruises she had hidden, all the fear she had swallowed so that she could survive another day. "But you did offend," Kirith said quietly. "You hurt someone who could not fight back, and you enjoyed it. That is not duty, Overseer Tharn. That is cruelty." The generals shifted in their seats, and for the first time, some of them looked at the little golden hatchling with something other than amusement. Varanthos rose from his seat, and his shadow fell across the chamber like the coming of night. "This matter will be judged," he declared, "formally and properly, as the law of witness demands. This council is adjourned. All of you will return in 3 days for the tribunal." As the generals filed out and the holographic projections flickered off, Kirith stood alone in the center of the chamber of flames, trembling with exhaustion and relief and the knowledge that he had just started something that could not be stopped. His father watched him in silence, and the eternal flames crackled and burned. And somewhere in the kitchens of House Varanthos, a human cook worked without knowing. The moment the last general left the chamber of flames, Varanthos turned to his son with eyes that burned like dying stars, and his voice was cold enough to freeze the air between them. "Everyone else, out," he commanded, and the remaining servants fled so quickly that their footsteps sounded like the patter of rain on stone. Then they were alone, father and son, the High Lord of 3 star systems, and the hatchling who had just humiliated him in front of his entire war council. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" Varanthos demanded, and he stalked toward Kirith with steps that shook the floor. "You have made me look like a fool. You have disrupted vital military planning. You have invoked a law that has not been used by a hatchling in 600 years. And you have done all of this for what?" Kirith wanted to back away, wanted to run, wanted to hide, but he forced himself to stand his ground, even as his father's shadow fell over him like a Way's shroud. Kirith said, and his voice came out smaller than he intended. "A friend," Varanthos repeated, and the word dripped with disbelief. "A human cook is your friend. A servant who exists to prepare meals is worthy of destroying your reputation before you have even begun to build it. Explain this to me, hatchling, because I do not understand." Kirith looked up at his father, at this towering figure of power and conquest, and he tried to find the words that would make him see. "When I wander the halls of this estate," Kirith began, "everyone bows to me. Everyone calls me Young Lord or the High Lord's son. Everyone treats me like I am made of glass and fire. But no one talks to me. No one asks me what I think, or what I feel, or what I want." Varanthos opened his mouth to speak, but Kirith pressed on, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Mira did not bow when she first saw me. She did not call me Young Lord with fear in her voice, offered me a pastry, and asked what I would like her to call me. And when I said just Kirith, she smiled and said, 'Very well, Kirith.' And it was the first time in my life that someone treated me like a person instead of a title." The anger in Varanthos's eyes flickered, replaced for just a moment by something that looked almost like recognition. "She is small and soft and breakable," Kirith continued. "Tharn has been hurting her for 3 years. Every day, sometimes more than once, and she never broke. She woke up every morning, and she cooked beautiful food, and she smiled at everyone, even though she was in pain. Do you know what that takes, father?" "She is human," Varanthos said, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "Yes," Kirith agreed, "she is human, and she is stronger than half the warriors in your army, because they have armor and weapons and fire, and all she has is herself, and she has not given up." Varanthos stared at his son for a long moment, and then he turned away and walked to the great window that overlooked the estate grounds, his wings folded tight against his back. "You should have come to me privately," he said finally. "You should have told me what you knew and let me handle it. Instead, you chose public spectacle. You chose to corner me with ancient law in front of my generals." "Would you have listened?" Kirith asked quietly. "If I had come to you and said, 'Father, an overseer is hurting the human servants,' would you have done anything? Or would you have told me that humans do not matter and sent me back to my tutors?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Varanthos stood at the window for a long time, and when he finally spoke again, his voice was different, softer somehow, though still edged with something sharp. "Bring me the household records for the past 10 years, he commanded. "All disciplinary actions involving human servants, all medical reports, all transfers, and terminations." Kirith's heart leaped with hope, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Yes, father," he said, and he rushed to find the household administrator. When the records arrived, Varanthos spread them across the obsidian table and began to read, and what he found made his scales darken with an emotion that Kirith could not quite name. 7 human servants had died under Overseer Tharn's management in the past decade, all ruled as accidents or natural causes. But when Varanthos looked at the medical reports, he saw patterns that should have been obvious to anyone who bothered to look. Broken bones that happened too often to be coincidental, internal injuries that were explained away as falls or lifting accidents, servants who were transferred to other estates with no explanation, only to die within months of their arrival. "I did not see this," Varanthos said, and his voice was hollow with something that might have been shame. "In my own house, and I did not see it," Kirith said gently, "because they were human, and humans do not count." Varanthos flinched as if his son had struck him, and then he straightened, and his eyes hardened with decision. "Bring me the cook," he commanded. "Bring me Mira Chen." When Mira was escorted into the Chamber of Flames, she looked so small and frightened that Kirith wanted to run to her and tell her that everything would be all right. But he forced himself to stay still and watch. She knelt before the High Lord with practiced grace, her eyes fixed on the floor, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "You may rise," Varanthos said, and his voice was surprisingly gentle. Mira stood, but she kept her eyes down, and Varanthos studied her with the same intensity that he used to analyze battle maps and enemy formations. He saw the old scars on her hands, the faded bruises on her wrists, herself like someone who was always ready to be hurt. "My son says you are strong," Varanthos rumbled. "He says that you have endured 3 years of abuse without breaking, without giving up, without losing your kindness." Mira's eyes flickered up for just a moment, surprised, before returning to the floor. "I have killed warriors who showed less courage than you show by simply standing here," Varanthos continued. "You are in the presence of the most powerful Dracorath in 3 star systems, accused of nothing, threatened with nothing, and yet you are more afraid than soldiers I have seen face certain death." "Forgive me, my lord," Mira whispered. "I do not mean to offend." "You do not offend," Varanthos said. "You educate. Look at me, cook." Mira raised her eyes, and Varanthos saw something there that he had not expected to find in a human. A quiet defiance, a stubborn refusal to be completely crushed, a spark that 3 years of cruelty had not been able to extinguish. Able to extinguish? "Why did you never report the Overseer?" Varanthos asked. "Would you have believed me, my lord?" Mira replied, and her voice was steady, even though her hands were shaking. "I am human, Tharn is Dracorath. I learned long ago that our pain is quiet. No one hears it but us." Varanthos was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that Kirith had never heard before. "I hear it now," he said, "and I find that I do not like what I am hearing." He turned to his son, and there was something new in his ancient burning eyes, something that looked almost like respect. "You were right to invoke the law," Varanthos admitted. "If you had come to me privately, I might have dismissed your concerns, but you forced me to look, and now I cannot unsee what I have seen." Kirith felt tears prick at his eyes, but he blinked them away, because crying in the Chamber of Flames was probably not dignified. "Tribunal will proceed as planned," Varanthos declared, "and Overseer Tharn will answer for his actions. All of them." Mira looked between the High Lord and the hatchling, and her expression was one of pure wonder, as if she was watching something impossible unfold before her eyes. "My lord," she said hesitantly, "I do not understand. Why would you do this for a human?" Varanthos looked at her, and then he looked at his son, and something in his ancient heart cracked open just a little. "Because my son asked me to," he said simply, "and because it is the right thing to do, and I should not need a hatchling to remind me of that." The tribunal was held on the 3rd day, as promised, and word had spread through the estate like wildfire, until every servant and guard and noble knew that something unprecedented was about to happen. The Chamber of Flames was filled to capacity. with Dracorath warriors lining the walls, and human servants crowded in the back, all of them watching with wide eyes as High Lord Varanthos took his seat at the head of the obsidian table. The 7 generals had returned, and the planetary governors flickered into existence as holographic projections, and all of them wore expressions of careful neutrality that hid their intense curiosity about what would happen next. Overseer Tharn was brought in by 2 guards, and he walked with his head held high and his wings spread wide, clearly still believing that this tribunal was a formality that would end in his favor. After all, he had done nothing wrong by the standards he understood. He had merely disciplined servants who needed to be disciplined, and the fact that they were human made their suffering even less significant in the eyes of traditional Dracorath law. Kireth stood beside his father's seat, his small golden form dwarfed by the massive chamber. But his eyes were steady, and his heart was calm, because he knew that he had done everything he could. Mira was there too, standing in the witness area, with her hands clasped in front of her, looking like she expected to wake up at any moment and discover that this was all a dream. "Overseer Tharn," Varanthos began, his voice rolling through the chamber like distant thunder, "you stand accused of multiple offenses against the honor of House Varanthos. You have harmed the claimed property of a noble without permission. You have conducted yourself in a manner unbefitting a Dracorath protector, and you have brought shame upon this household through cruelty disguised as duty." Tharn's composure flickered for just a moment, quickly recovered his confident expression. "My lord, I have served this house faithfully for 30 years, he said smoothly. "I have managed the servants with efficiency and discipline. Any actions I took were in the interest of maintaining order. I meant no offense to the young lord or to this house." "You have killed 7 people in this house," Varanthos said, and his voice was suddenly sharp as broken glass. The chamber went silent, and even the eternal flames seemed to burn lower for a moment. "I have reviewed the records," Varanthos continued. 7 human servants died under your management. All ruled as accidents, but the pattern of injuries tells a different story. You beat them until they broke, and then you disposed of them like damaged equipment. Tharn's scales paled to a sickly gray, and his wings folded tight against his back in unconscious submission. "My lord, they were only humans," he said, and the words came out almost pleading. "Their lives are short, and their value is limited. I was merely maintaining discipline," he said. "Discipline does not require death," Varanthos said. "Discipline does not require cruelty. And even if humans are beneath our protection by tradition, the humans in this house are mine, and you damaged what was mine." He rose from his seat, and his shadow fell across Tharn like the hand of judgment itself. "I find you guilty of all charges," Varanthos declared. "You are stripped of your rank and title. Your wings will be bound for 1 year as a mark of your shame, and you are permanently exiled from all properties and holdings of House Varanthos." Tharn collapsed to his knees, his proud bearing finally crumbling under the weight of his sentence. Because for a Dracorath, having your wings bound was one of the greatest humiliations possible, a public declaration that you were not worthy of flight. The generals murmured among themselves, clearly satisfied that justice had been served. And some of them were already preparing to leave, when Varanthos held up one clawed hand. "I am not finished," he said, and something in his voice made everyone freeze in place. He turned to face the assembled crowd, Dracorath and human alike, and when he spoke again, his words carried the weight of 3,000 years of history. "My hatchling taught me something today," Varanthos said. "We Dracorath pride ourselves on honor, on strength, on protecting those who cannot protect themselves. We call ourselves the guardians of the galaxy, the keepers of order, the flames that burn away darkness." He paused, and his burning eyes swept across the chamber. But we decided long ago that humans were too small to protect, too weak to matter, too different to be worthy of our honor. We made them servants and laborers and cooks, and we told ourselves that their suffering was not our concern, because they were not our people. Mira was trembling now, and Kirith moved closer to her, his small body pressing against her leg in silent support. My son saw what I was blind to, Varanthos continued. He saw a human woman who endured 3 years of torment without breaking, who woke up every morning and did her job with skill and grace, who showed kindness to a lonely hatchling, even when she had every reason to let her heart turn to stone. He looked directly at Mira, and for the second time in her life, a High Lord of the Dracorath inclined his head to a human cook. That is not weakness, Varanthos said. I do not know what to call it, but it is not weakness, and it deserves better than what we have given it. The generals exchanged shocked glances, and the holographic governors flickered with interference as they leaned forward to hear every word. From this day forward, Varanthos declared, the humans in House Varanthos will be protected by the same codes of honor that protect Dracorath. They will not be beaten. For minor offenses, they will not be killed and discarded like broken tools. They will be treated with the basic dignity that all thinking beings deserve. He turned to Mira. And you, Mira Chen, are no longer a servant of this house. You are a retainer. The first human retainer in the history of House Varanthos. You will answer only to my son, who claimed you, and to me, and you will be protected by the full weight of my name and power. Mira's legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, not in a bow, but in pure shock, and tears streamed down her face as she tried to find words that would not come. Kirith rushed to her side and wrapped his small wings around her as best he could, and she held him tight and sobbed into his golden scales. My lord, one of the generals said hesitantly, this is unprecedented. The other noble houses will question this decision. They will say that you have gone soft, that your hatchling has influenced you. Inappropriately, Varanthos replied, and there was fire in his voice now, real fire. Let them come to my house and tell me that I am soft. I have conquered more worlds than any living Dracorath. I have burned fleets and crushed rebellions, and made empires tremble at the sound of my name. And if I say that humans deserve basic dignity, then humans deserve basic dignity. The general wisely chose not to argue further. As the tribunal ended and the crowd began to disperse, Kirith stayed with Mira in the center of the Chamber of Flames, still holding her as she cried. I do not understand, she whispered. I do not understand how this happened. A week ago I was nothing, and now I am standing in the most powerful estate in 3 star systems, and a High Lord is saying that I matter. You always mattered, Kirith said softly. You just did not know it yet. Mira laughed through her tears, a broken sound that was somehow still. You saved my life, little one, she said. You, a hatchling, invoked ancient law and faced down your own father to save a human cook. How can I ever repay that? Keep making honey cakes, Kirith said seriously, with extra cinnamon. And Mira laughed again, a real laugh this time, and she hugged him tighter. In the days and weeks that followed, word spread across the empire of what had happened in House Varanthos, and opinions were divided, as they always are when something challenges the way things have always been. Some Dracorath called Varanthos a fool, and predicted that his house would fall. But his house did not fall, and his power did not diminish, and slowly, very slowly, other houses began to look at their human servants with new eyes. It would take years for the change to spread, decades for it to become normal, centuries for it to be complete. But historians would eventually mark that day in the Chamber of Flames as the moment when everything began to shift, because sometimes the mightiest changes begin with the smallest voices. Sometimes the youngest eyes see the clearest, and sometimes a lonely dragon hatchling and a bruised human cook can change the course of history simply by being kind to each other when the whole universe says they should not. Kirith grew up to be a great leader in his own right, known throughout the Empire for his fairness and his strange belief that all thinking beings deserve dignity. And Mira remained at his side as his most trusted advisor, the first of many humans who would rise to positions of honor in Dracorath's society. And every morning, no matter how busy they were, they shared honey cakes with extra cinnamon, because some traditions are worth keeping forever.